Okay, so without further ado, let's move on to our noon session, Professional Development, Why It Matters, and How to Make It Meaningful with Mike Rose. So I'm introducing Mike Rose, a man who needs no introduction. So what can I tell you? Mike's biography is almost as compelling as his work, and you can read it on the conference homepage if you haven't already. So let me just touch on a few recent notes. During the last decade, Mike Rose has written widely on the importance of public education in a democracy and on the need for a more humane philosophy of education that goes beyond economic benefit and learning as measured by standardized test scores. His most recent book, Back to School, looks at the schools that serve a growing population of second chancers, exploring what higher education, in the fullest sense of the term, can offer and why it is so critical to support the institutions that make it possible for millions of Americans to better their lot in life. In this book, he reminds us, as he has in other texts he's written and spoken texts that he's delivered, that our nation's economic and civic future, American democracy itself, rests heavily on the health of the institutions that serve millions every day, not just those top 20 universities identified by U.S. News and World Report. And he paints a compelling picture of the community, colleges, and adult education programs that afford so many a pathway to a better life and attainment of their personal goals. In his March 22nd op-ed piece in the Christian Science Monitor, he approaches this theme from a slightly different direction, not only the needs of students to be developed as citizens of their academic and other communities, but the need for college teachers to be developed as teachers to meet the needs of those students through thoughtfully crafted professional development programming. In this session, Mike will discuss a rationale for quality professional development in higher education, what it should be and how it benefits both teachers and students. He'll illustrate his discussion with classroom examples and provide suggestions for practice. As in every session, we welcome your questions and comments, and we'll be sure to save time for that at the end. So Mike, I'm going to turn this show over to you. Are you ready?
I am ready. Thank you,
Great.
Amy.
Thank you.
All right. Well, first, hello, everybody. And I want to start by offering you 3 reasons why I think we do need quality professional development. And these won't come as a surprise to you. The first one is that, few of us have received really significant training or guidance when we were in graduate school as to how to teach well. Now, there are exceptions. I mean, some writing and rhetoric graduate programs do provide training in pedagogy and mentorship, but often other programs don't. Typical English Department or education programs don't. MFA programs don't. And unless you have been lucky enough to get explicit mentorship in your teaching, the chances are that you've left graduate school without a lot of work aimed at you, helping you become a better teacher. The second reason is, and let's be honest about this, some institutions and some departments within those institutions where you now work value teaching more than others. Now, there's rewards for good teaching. There's awards that are given. There's the esteem of students. And most institutions, even research universities, consider exemplary teaching as a factor in promotion. Some campuses even have resources for instruction. They places where you can go to get some assistance with your teaching, but these tend to be low-status places, and they're underutilized and typically underfunded. A community college vice president I know said it really well. She said, quote, "We don't cultivate a professional identity around teaching." And I can just tell you from my own experience in the jillions of faculty meetings I've attended in my life, teaching may be discussed as part of somebody's personnel case, but never as a general topic of interest. And then the third reason that I think professional development is really important is for a complex set of reasons that are familiar to any of you who are teaching right now. A lot of our students don't come to us with strong pre-collegiate educations, and they need a lot of extra assistance. As Amy just suggested in that intro, particularly in the community colleges and state colleges where most Americans receive their higher education, students are increasingly older, they work, many have children, a significant percentage are the first in their families to go to college. And on average, somewhere between 40 to 50% need one or more courses, remedial courses in English or math, and in many community colleges, the numbers are much, much higher. You know, the phrase that you have heard all the time is the non-traditional student. Well, in fact, something like 45% of American undergraduates now qualify as being the non-traditional student. So the non-traditional student is becoming the traditional student. And I think there's one more thing to note that's important here about our students, that while some of us can certainly relate to our students on a number of levels, along class or race or gender lines, or because of their age, or maybe because of their parents, or because of a mutual interest, but one level that we probably can't identify with them on is the fact that if you're teaching a remedial class, the students in that class have not done well in the subject that you know so well and care about. They don't like it, or they're fearful of it, or they avoid it. And so that's a significant difference, and sometimes can make it difficult for us, especially for newer teachers, to kind of get a purchase on exactly what to do in your classroom. So those are three, I think, powerful reasons why we need quality to professional development and just more attention paid to teaching on our campuses. Now, another piece of that introduction that Amy gave had to do with why professional development is meaningful. So why is it meaningful to you? I've just given you a sort of a macro level justification as to why we need quality attention paid to teaching. Why is it meaningful to you? Well, again, I will offer three reasons. And the first is, and again, this is common sense, that to do your work well, you know, you may well need some guidance. We all do. You need a sounding board. You need mentoring. You need tricks of the trade. You need some place to just check in. You know, you want to improve your teaching, or you wouldn't be attending this webinar. And to develop that teaching identity that the community college vice president talked about, it seems to me that we just need opportunities to hone our craft. Now, the better you get at it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be less time consuming, although it can. The better you get at certain kinds of things, like assessing papers and providing feedback, that will save you time. But what's more important, I think, is that this kind of development, this kind of focus on your teaching, makes your teaching more fluid, more effective, more fulfilling, so that you're better able to do what you're setting out to do. It makes you feel more confident and competent. And that, you know, let's face it, that's the juice that flows through all of us. The second thing is, just in terms of your own self-interest, that the more you improve your craft, you become more marketable. And I know that a number of folks who are attending this webinar probably have adjunct positions at one or more colleges. And, you know, of course, you're probably looking for something that's more stable and permanent. And adjunct instructors have told me again and again how beneficial it is to them to be pulled into professional activities at their campus, you know, from curriculum development to this kind of professional development and teaching workshops and whatnot. So I think there's a lot to be gained just in terms of your marketability. The more skills, the more experience you have to take with you when you leave a place, the better shape you'll be in. And the final reason as to why this kind of work is meaningful is because, let's face it, teaching really matters. It mattered immensely to me. A high school teacher saved my life. And if it wasn't for 3 or 4 instructors and professors at the college I went to, I have no idea where I'd be today. And as I visited campuses over the years, talking to students, I can't tell you how many of them attest to the profound difference that 1 or 2 teachers have made in their lives. So this is important work. This is important, fundamentally valuable work. So let me now start to move a little bit toward making these points concrete by talking about some of the things that you can do to help improve your teaching. So I'm going to provide a little mini professional development session right here. I'm going to offer a few suggestions, a few tricks of the trade that I've either developed myself over the years or that I've seen really effective teachers do. And I'm going to start this with a brief story from my own early days of teaching. This is just when I had been at it for a few years. And I was assigned to teach an introductory humanities course for UCLA Extension. And, you know, university extensions are self-supporting for the most part, and so they're always coming up with various kinds of programs to keep the cash flowing in. And some of you might be actually working in such programs right now. The one that I was working in, or one of the ones I was working in, was aimed at people who were employed in the criminal justice system here in Los Angeles. And the class that I had of 30 people included some gang intervention workers, some parole aides, some traffic cops, a few detectives, and they were taking this Introduction to Humanities course because in some way or another they were trying to, you know, just get a few more credits to improve their lot at work, or in some cases were trying to accrue credits because they wanted to put them toward an Associates of Arts degree or perhaps a bachelor's degree at some college. And, you know, like a lot of you on your first assignments, I was given a syllabus and wished good luck, and off I went to my humanities class. But I did a couple things that turned out to be really helpful. The first thing I did was just right out of the gate, I gave all those students a little survey that I made up, and it just, you know, had questions on it like what was their level of schooling and what was the last English class they took and when was that and what are their goals for taking this class, just a few things like that to give me a sense of who was in the room. And that's a simple thing that you can do. It certainly doesn't take much time to make up such a survey, and you can skim them, and it gives you a feel for your audience. And then the second thing I did was, you know, as you would imagine, I started out by giving a little bit of a lecture on Oedipus the King and talked about the Oedipus plays and Greek tragedy and the notion of Greek tragedy within Greek society and why these plays seem to be so important. And then what I did after my presentation was I handed out to them a few pages of notes that I wrote up if I were a student in the class. And I didn't make them spectacular notes, not like they were the super best in the world, but I made them adequate. So notes that a good student should have gotten out of that lecture if they were, you know, skillful at note-taking. So we ended up spending the last half hour of the class comparing my notes with the notes that they took. And that led to a really rich discussion of just a lot of stuff, like how can they know that something was important? You know, how did I signal it? Was it through intonation? Was it through gesture? Was it through something I put on the board? So how do they know when something's worth taking down? And how could they separate out a big idea from specific facts? Another huge thing, right? And we talked about this kind of stuff, and we even talked about things like how can you ask a question without looking like you're stupid, because, you know, that was on everybody's mind. So that little exercise, and I'll say more about it in a moment, that little exercise turned out to be really fruitful, especially at the beginning of this course. Many years later, when I was doing some research, some of the research that would end up in the book that Amy mentioned, Back to School, I was talking to the chair of a math department at a community college, and he was complaining about the level of preparation of his students, and he said something to the effect of, it was his job to teach mathematics, not to show students how to use a mathematics textbook. And, you know, I just couldn't disagree more with that statement, because I think spending time on some of these basics like the note-taking or the textbook, and I'll talk about that in a moment, that doing that not only to provide your students with much needed technique and skill that they might not have gotten along the way, but it also can really lead to a further exploration of the subject itself. Because I'll tell you, while we were talking about note-taking technique, we were also talking further about Greek tragedy and about literary interpretation and about what the humanities can provide for us. So that note-taking exercise, while it was focused on skill, also had the wonderful secondary effect of allowing us to further our discussion about the play itself and about Greek tragedy. So let me continue in this vein of offering some suggestions and discuss some more things that I think you can do in your classrooms, things that are pretty simple and very low tech and will not take huge amounts of time, but I think will have really nice payoff for you. So in addition to the note-taking kind of exercise and the little survey that I mentioned, in addition to those kinds of things, I think that it's really valuable to know your resources. What exists on your campus that you can utilize for the benefit of your students? If you teach at several places, I know this might take a few minutes, but find out, where the tutoring center is, where the writing center is, computer lab, that kind of thing. And then if it's possible, establish a link with them whereby your students need to receive X number of hours of tutoring, let's say, through the semester. So that what you're doing is you're certainly helping yourself and your students by getting them over to get some extra assistance, but you're also getting them into the habit of going to these places and receiving these kind of benefits. Now, on some campuses as well, these centers also offer workshops themselves on note-taking and study skills and whatnot. And on some campuses, they're able to actually craft a little workshop around your particular class and the needs that you have in terms of, let's say, the books you're assigning or the note-taking skills that you want students to have. So these are important resources, not only for your students, but for you. We mentioned the textbook, that grumble that the department chair offered about spending time taking his students through the textbook. Well, I actually think that's a really valuable thing to do. If you use a textbook or if there's books that are central to your class, it's not a bad idea to spend a little bit of time taking students through them as books, as artifacts, as resources. I mean, they certainly know, there's a table of contents and there's an index and stuff like that, but do they really know how to use these features to their best advantage? So taking a few minutes, go over, if it's a textbook, the table of contents, the index, a glossary if it has one. What's the layout and format? Changes in font, what does that signal? So spending some time at the beginning of class just getting them familiar with the way this thing works, again, can have nice benefit both for them and for you. Another thing that I like to do is I like to take full advantage of the syllabus. Now, I know in a lot of cases the syllabus you get is pretty much boilerplate, and then you insert maybe a few your own stuff, a few assignments and that sort of thing. But let me say a few words about the syllabus. So obviously everybody, when you begin your class, you spend some time going over the syllabus, and that's just sort of pro forma, right? But a couple things. One is make sure that you've got in that syllabus everything that is really important to you. So I've known, for example, some instructors who have really strong feelings about tardiness and coming late or absences. They say it verbally, but it's not in the syllabus. Well, the syllabus is a kind of contract. So the first thing to remember is anything that really is important to you, make sure it's written out. But in terms of using the syllabus as a pedagogical tool, I like going through it and really having discussion about things where there may be a lot of ambiguity, like plagiarism. But then what I like to do is I like to go back 2 or 3 weeks into the term and review the syllabus again. Because when you do it right at the beginning of things, I mean, it's certainly important to do that. It provides a roadmap to the class. But there's a kind of abstract quality to it. People aren't embedded in the experience of your classroom yet. 2 or 3 weeks in, they are. And so I think that going over that syllabus one more time, maybe highlighting particular things that you see have emerged as issues or problems, very important. I mean, I do this in my graduate courses. 3 or 4 times during the term, I'll stop and check in and see where we are in the syllabus. Let's see where we've covered. Let's see what's coming up next. It's like an ongoing roadmap that I like to keep consulting with my students. There's other things you can do related to the schedule of your class, and one is to talk about time. Now, you know, I know, because we all did this too, that many students are doing their assignments right before class, but I think it's important to start to talk to them about time and the time something's going to take. I was struck when I was sitting in a fashion class with the effectiveness of the following. The teacher had just given them an assignment. They were to construct a part of a garment, and she was a professional in the industry. And so what she did was she pulled out her day planner, and with them she kind of backward planned. She said, okay, look, so if I have an assignment like this, this is the way I think. And then she showed them the way she mapped backwards, day by day, how long it was going to take her to complete that assignment, sort of step by step. And it was a very visual and concrete illustration of something that can be quite abstract, and that is like the amount of time it's going to take you to complete something. Also, based on your experience or the experience of others you're talking to, you can anticipate problems as you're going through the syllabus. You know, is it likely that your students are coming to you with certain kinds of expectations or assumptions about the course? And maybe you picked that up from that little survey you gave them at the beginning that I mentioned. The speech teacher who I met, she says she begins every new class of hers by making very clear that she does not want students reading their speech. That in high school, sometimes that's allowed, but for her, no reading of speech. So again, she's kind of cutting off at the pass possible problems that can emerge down the line. I'm talking about anticipating problems. I think it's worth saying something about computer-based augmentations. You know, these are listed in the syllabus often, but it's worth spending just a little separate moment or two on this, because a lot of folks these days, a lot of programs are using them, you know, websites or e-portfolios and other kinds of platforms to assist instruction. An adjunct instructor I know, a young woman, said something to me that I thought was really wise, and she said, quote, she said, you know, we all have the assumption that our students are tech savvy, especially the younger ones. But she said the way that we use a computer in classroom or in an academic setting is not necessarily the way that it's used outside of school. And I thought that was a really nice insight, because as she pointed out, students might have a whole range of difficulties with the computer in the service of the academic work they're doing. I mean, everything from, you know, not very good keyboarding skills to not being very sophisticated about how to use Google. And by the way, it's important, I think, for us to remember, even in this day when it seems like we're surrounded by electronic media, that the digital divide is still alive and well. And a lot of students, particularly in poorer schools, don't have access or steady access to computers or internet access. So that takes me back to the first point I raised about knowing your resources. You know, if your campus has a computer lab, which it probably does, and if in the tutoring center or the learning center they actually provide some instruction, as some do, in using the computer for academic purposes, then that's a really terrific resource for your students, particularly ones who, you know, don't have access to a computer or to internet access. So we've covered a lot of just specific things, and again, you know, pretty concrete things. The survey, the helping students with notes, familiarizing them with textbooks, going over the syllabus, checking in about computers, all that sort of stuff. The one I want to get to now, and this will take a little time, and it will take us to the end of my time with you, but I think it's, of all the things we've talked about today, I think this is the most important because it has to do with the very heartbeat of your classroom, and that is the whole business of students asking questions and seeking help. This is a huge thing, and as I said, I think it can shape the way your class goes and determine to some extent how successful it's going to be. Now, you know, the fact that you're participating in this webinar means that you are an asker of questions, that at least within the bounds of the schoolhouse and the college classroom, you know how to seek help when you need it. So it can be really frustrating, even baffling, when our students, some significant percentage of our students don't ask questions, and they don't come up to see us after class, and they don't come to office hours if you're set up to have them. And then suddenly they're failing, and you didn't have much of an indication that that was going on, that they were completely stymied, totally stuck, that the reason they weren't turning papers in was because they were petrified of looking stupid or completely paralyzed with writer's block or whatnot, but never came to see you. I'm sure you've all had that experience. So I think what's important to remember at a time like this is that asking questions and seeking help in an academic context is a learned behavior. You know, we're not born knowing how to do this stuff. And people can be reluctant to do it for a whole host of reasons, you know, maybe a history of failure. We were talking about this a little earlier. A history of failure, of not doing well at all in the subject that you're teaching. Or they're shy. Or they're fearful of looking stupid. You know, we always say, we're fond of saying things like, well, there's no such thing as a stupid question, but that's not the way it feels, right? There's cultural norms sometimes that can stand in the way of students asking questions and seeking help, codes of masculinity. There's all kinds of reasons why someone might not seek out the help that they need. So then the question becomes, what can you do? And the first thing to say is the most general one, and that is that classroom atmosphere is hugely important. How you respond to questions and requests yourself. So this isn't simply an issue of your personal style or the persona that you develop as a teacher or the way you organize the room or any of that, although all those factors can play into it. But what I'm talking about is something more fundamental and existential, really. I'm talking about the sense students pick up from the way a teacher addresses them, the way a teacher responds to questions, the way a teacher deals with requests, the sense that they pick up. Because the bottom line for them is this place safe? Do I feel respected in it? And if they do, students are going to be more willing to answer questions or ask a question or participate or take a chance with you. And in turn, students then pick up on the way that teachers respond to them, and they'll tend to replicate it in their interactions with others, which is going to have this wonderful kind of ripple effect in the way people address each other. I'll give you a brief example of the opposite of that still sticks in my mind 30 years after the fact. This was a while ago, and I was about to teach a creative writing class in poetry. And I had never taken a creative writing class myself, and so I figured I wanted to see how one works. And so I signed up for a course at UCLA Extension, and it was taught by a very well-known local poet, widely respected fellow. And so I went to the first class, and a few people, volunteered to read the poems that they brought in. And this guy proceeded in the most kind of arch and snarky way to just kind of dismantle each piece of poetry and each person who volunteered. It was a really unpleasant thing, and I can remember even at that first class registering, a complaint or two as he was doing what he was doing. It just seemed so wrong to me. Well, here's the interesting thing. By the second class, as you could imagine, fewer people were there. Maybe that's what he wanted. But by the time I stuck it out for a while, and by the time we were in the third or fourth class, people were the ones who stuck around, they were responding to each other the way that he had responded to that first group. And I thought, oh my God, this is, it's like an infection. People pick it up. So the tone that you set not only encourages individual students to take a chance with you, but it also ripples out into the way people treat each other. So that's a general thought about this business of classroom atmosphere and students seeking help. Another thing you can do is to simply raise the issue directly, to discuss it, to present some personal anecdotes of your own, if appropriate, about, the times that you were worried and fearful of asking for help and how you overcame that. Or maybe stories of students you've had in the past that are appropriate to this discussion. And sometimes if it fits, you could create a reading or writing assignment that might, that might forward this discussion. You could create a little scenario or something and give it to them and have them write about it, a scenario in which someone is either reluctant to seek help or does seek help. Another thing, and this seems so simple, almost benign, that it's surprising the effect it has, and that is to just strike up informal conversations with people. When you're standing outside waiting for the room to empty, or after class and everybody's gathering up their stuff, or you bump into somebody in the hall, just a few words of chit-chat. It's surprising what an effect this kind of thing can have. One young woman I was talking to, she was referring to her history instructor, and she said, I was so surprised that she knew my name and asked me how the class was going. So that little thing made a big impression on this student. And I think the more of that happens, then the more comfortable they feel, and maybe the more willing to open up. The next thing I'm going to say is also obvious, but sadly pretty lacking in our culture at large, and is a huge, huge thing in a classroom, and that's listening. And I mean really listening carefully. I'm going to read to you, just because I've got it so succinctly here, I'm going to read to you a little passage from that Back to School book that Amy referred to. To conduct good classroom discussion, especially discussion that includes everyone, the teacher has to listen closely. Listen not only to what's said, but also what might be intended but not fully articulated. Then the teacher can assist performance. And this, by the way, I think is a huge thing. This is what listening closely enables you to do, is assist performance. And then I just offer a few kind of, things that or phrases or sentences, rather, that I could imagine somebody saying, or certainly I've said, and I've heard a lot of others say. So the teacher can then assist performance. Quote, say some more, say more. I think I see where you're going. So someone's starting to articulate something and they kind of falter. You say something that encourages them to go further down that road. Or don't shut yourself off. You got a good idea there. So again, you know, you're listening to somebody and you see this nugget that for whatever reason someone's not able to fully articulate, and you assist, or whoa, okay, I see, I think I've got it. Now let me say it back to you to make sure that I'm really understanding what you're trying to tell me. So just all that kind of active listening stuff, I think, can be a really powerful assist to articulation and to thinking. Now, that kind of listening also enables you to do something else, and that is it enables you to make connections between what one student says and another, maybe even remembering something that was said the day before and making the connection to something that someone's saying right now. And students, as would any of us, are impressed and feel validated that a teacher remembered what they said and deemed it worthy enough to put it back into play. The last thing I'm going to say about that, this whole business of discussion, and this is a little controversial because not everyone agrees with me, but I call on students. I'm not at all reluctant to not simply ask for volunteers to respond to a question, but to call on people. And that can be awful if the classroom atmosphere is the kind that that poet set up. But if the other things I'm talking about are in play here, the respect, the decency, the openness, students might feel uncomfortable at first, but I've never seen it fail that they end up being grateful that they're pulled into things and become a part of this little community that you create. That's not my dog, by the way. I don't know whose that is. Maybe we have a dog on the webinar. Let me conclude my discussion here with one last quotation, one last little story. And I think it sums up much of what we've talked about. It's an example, certainly, of why it's valuable to call on people, but I think it also gets back to those initial points I made about why professional development, why getting better at your craft is so important, because teaching finally matters so much to so many people. And this is a woman, she was about 29, I think, when I interviewed her. She had been to college before, dropped out, had a series of jobs that were pretty meaningless to her, and she came back, but she wasn't sure what she wanted to do. She was unfocused. She was kind of taking one class at a time, and then she took a remedial English course. And it was a challenging course for her, and the instructor was difficult, not an easy course. But this instructor would call on her in class. And in the hall, he would speak to her about her paper, something that he read in one of her papers that he really liked. He would ask for her opinion about things. He asked her after class or in the hall, he asked her what she wanted to do with her life. So he took this kind of interest in her. And here's what she said. She said, quote, "I never had a teacher talk to me like that. He was poking at my brain. Wow," I thought, "I'm not dumb." Well, that's why we're doing the work we're doing, to try to foster that kind of self-realization, to foster that kind of interest in ideas, to forge these human connections around academic work, and to help people grow. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Mike. One thing that I was struck by as you were talking about, creating a particular kind of classroom culture or classroom environment, and kind of an environment that encourages students to speak into it and to feel safe and to develop. And I was thinking about how, in some ways, that's also applicable to instructors. And many people, as you said at the beginning, are kind of in a campus culture that doesn't really make them feel safe about asking their questions about professional development or talking about their teaching or foregrounding their teaching. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on, how can people sort of correct for that, or maybe build community on their own campus or within their system. Have you seen any good examples of sort of homegrown or grassroots professional development programs or communities in any of the colleges you've visited?
Right. Yeah, I have, and you're bringing up a really wonderful point, and thank you for making that connection between what I was saying about students and the very same thing in so many ways holds true for instructors, and I think particularly for instructors who might have adjunct status where you feel like you're really pretty powerless, and
right.
So I have a couple different thoughts. One is to just not underestimate the power of forming whatever immediate small groups you can. I mean, I've seen this happen a lot, and I'm sure you have too, where just even a couple like-minded souls decide to get together once a month over food or whatnot and to talk about their teaching. So just on the most basic level, I think folks getting together themselves who have common interests. And by the way, I would recommend strongly for people who are new to a department, new to a campus, to seek out those folks who they think are good or who have a good reputation or who strike them as being, the kind of teacher they want to be. Take that person to coffee, forge those connections. So all of that is a kind of the individual level. On the campus level, I think that those justifications that I gave right at the beginning are the same kinds of justifications that a group of teachers, the group of instructors could take to an administrator. I mean, these are the reality. These are the kinds of students we have. Many of us didn't get any kind of training to work with these kinds of students when we were in graduate school. We very much need this kind of assistance. Now, the pushback is going to be, well, it's expensive. And here's my response to that. It touches on what you said. Often the skills to do this kind of thing, the kind of knowledge that I'm talking about here, is right there on the campus. I mean, there are experienced people who have thought long and hard about their teaching, and they can be pulled in themselves to lead professional development. And I've seen this kind of thing happen where it's led, not by some expensive outside expert who flies in for half a day and leaves, but people who are on the campus who can continue to do this on an ongoing basis. That's huge because it's not enough to have the quick hit, Amy. You want to be able to check in and check in again and maybe have these meetings every so often.
Yeah.
And then the final thing to say is that, yes, you know this, I'm sure, from your eagle's eye view of the nation, but there are some regions and some states who have developed powerful organizations. Here in California, the community college, really enterprising community college folk up and down the state have gotten together. One was called the Basic Skills Initiative. There's several others. There's other vehicles or formats where they can get together across campuses and across regions of the state to talk about exactly the kind of stuff we're talking about. So it can happen on all levels, from the most personal and close over dinner kind of thing to a campus effort that draws on the talent of the campus to these kinds of large statewide initiatives.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's something that is happening on multiple levels, and that, and part of it does involve sort of enacting the same kind of courage that we want to see from our students, and taking that first step and saying there's more that I need to know, there's more that I want to know, and kind of finding those like-minded people or those mentors and coaches, which can sometimes be challenging to ask somebody to engage with you like that. But what you're saying, I think, about students and in an unfamiliar culture and they need to take courage, and they need to know that people are interested in them and helping them develop their personal identity. And we need to know that that's there for us too, relative to personal and professional identity.
Yeah, it is. And, just one thing to say about that on the personal level. So, sure, there may be some folks that are experienced and seasoned and, maybe they're really full of themselves, or they're not willing to share in the way that we would like. But my experience, and I'm sure it's yours too, is that many of these folks are dying to be able to talk to other people about what they do. I mean, they think about it. They're passionate about it. So I think a young, new instructor on a campus would most likely be well received, and the senior person would be happy to be able to have somebody who actually cares deeply about what he or she cares deeply about.
I think so too. I think even though, as you said earlier in faculty meetings and I've noticed sort of increasingly at professional conferences also, there's kind of a moving the conversation away from teaching, but that doesn't really mean that that our hearts have moved away from it, that conversation could still be opened even though it isn't bubbling up on the surface right now.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mike. As always, so much to think about, and I really appreciate you joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It really was. Thanks a lot, and thanks to everybody who's attending the webinar.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending this session, and I hope that you will join us for our 1 o'clock Eastern session, Everyday Research in the Internet Age with Laura Garak. So we'll take a short break and be right back. Thank you.